They are two men living and working in Toronto and Montreal who the RCMP allege were plotting to attack a Via Rail passenger train. Joining us now to discuss the role moderate Muslim voices have in combating homegrown radical Islam. In the nation's capital, Sheema Khan, columnist with the Globe and Mail, and with us here in studio, Imam Shabir Ally, president of the Islamic Information and Dawah Center International. And I'm happy to have both of you, familiar faces on our program again. It's nice to see you both. Let's start with the following. Nobody's been convicted of anything yet, so let's establish that off the top. Our discussion tonight is very much going to be based on what we know, based on published reports and so on, and we'll do the best we can. And let's start with the Canadian example. Two men suspected of plotting to derail this train. It appears that both men led fairly normal lives, one a PhD student, one a budding entrepreneur. Sheema, let's start with you. How does a seemingly normal person who's been here in this country for years get hooked up with radical Islam?
Well, if I had the answer to that question, I would be talking to as many people as I could.
Be a more peaceful world,
I don't know.
eh?
It would be a more peaceful world. You know, in one of these cases, and we also had in the case of one of the young men from London, and also with Tamerlane Tsarnaev.
In Boston.
These were individuals in Boston, right? These were individuals who were not actually observant in their faith. They liked to party, you know, and whatnot. And then they went through a sudden change, you know, what you'd call the equivalence of becoming born again. And a lot of people go through that. But in some cases, the pendulum just swings too far. And I was struck by one of the comments that I was told, that I read about in news reports about one of the London youngsters, was that he found it very hard to change, and that in his mind the only way to be forgiven was to die as a martyr. And I think we really have to really help people who would like to come, you know, observe their spirituality in a balanced way, in a moderate way, and not in a way that seems that it's, you know, black and white and has to be very harsh.
Imam, can you help explore that for us as well? How somebody goes from apparently a normal middle-class Canadian existence to in touch with radical Islam and then planning something like this?
I think Sheema has hit it right on the button in that some people start suddenly to look for the fundamentals of the religion. They turn back to the Quran, they turn back to the collections of hadith reports about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They go back to classical Islamic works. And all of this material was collected or framed within a context of violence. It is not new to the religion of Islam that a prophet or a founder starts to preach something that is very different from the surrounding and accepted faith at the time, and this new preachment is met with a violent sort of response. What is different in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that he defended his religion by taking up the sword. And within that context of the clash of two civilizations right there, we have the birth of the Islamic tradition in the form of the Quran, the hadith reports, and the classical elaboration of these two sources.
What little I know about that has also been told to me that vengeance of this nature against innocence is nothing the Prophet would have accepted or that the Quran teaches.
Absolutely, you're correct about that, and I would say the same thing.
So then
however,
how do these dots get connected?
What happens with the person who, let's say in the case of the Toronto 18, we saw that there were some who had just recently embraced the religion of Islam, and yet they took up this violence as their method of perhaps establishing the dominance of Islam in the world. And what they're doing here is that they're looking back at the classical Islamic elaboration of these themes, and to them, it must be that Islam, as the truth for the world, must be a dominant ruling power, and the Sharia, or the Islamic law, as it was first established in the city of Medina some 1400 years ago under the supervision of the Prophet Muhammad, must be duplicated everywhere, like the McDonald's franchises. We must see this golden arch everywhere. We must see the beauty and the magnificence of Islam wherever we go, and that must be in the form of the application of the Sharia.
Okay, but let me follow up with Sheema Khan on this. The profile of the one surviving alleged terrorist in Boston lists his worldview as Islam and his personal priority as, quote, career and money. Now, to my mind, that sounds like a contradiction. Is it?
Actually, no. You know, to have an Islamic worldview, and again, I just want to go back to something that the Imam said. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And for a lot of these young people, they learn a little bit and they think they know everything there is to know, and they run with it. And of course, it depends on who's teaching them. As far as, I mean, one of the things that you learn, I came to Islam later in life. I went through what I call my fundy phase, where, you know, everything looked black and white. But as you learn more, you realize the most difficult aspect of the faith is being a balanced personality. And that means, yes, go out and make money in this world, you know, enjoy this world within bounds, and also give attention to your spirituality. Don't neglect, you know, one aspect of life at the expense of the other. We're not asked to do that. We're asked to actually live a very balanced life. And I think we forget that. And there's an extremely innovative program in the UK, which came out shortly after the July bombings in 2007, called the Radical Middle Way. And it's aimed at youth, you know, who are, if you like, coming back to the fold of the faith. That the middle way is actually quite radical, because it is the most, it is a difficult path to be balanced.
All right, let me, Imam, bring us back to the Canadian example then. One of the suspects in the train plot here in Canada, in his court appearance yesterday in Toronto, said the accusations against him are baseless because they're only based on the criminal code, which was written by men, as opposed to the Holy Book, which comes from God. Now, how does one counter an argument like that?
By showing that the Quran itself insists that Muslims must follow their local authorities. The Quran in the 4th chapter says that you should obey God and obey the Prophet and those in authority among you. So it has long been an established principle in Islamic jurisprudence that Muslims, wherever they are, should obey their secular authorities.
But if he's a religious Muslim, surely he would know that. But he doesn't say that in court yesterday.
You see, we're all familiar with how religions are elaborated, how they're interpreted, and how the source text can become storehouses where anyone goes in and picks out whatever he wants. So I have now highlighted this verse which says that we should obey our authorities, whereas someone like this person uttering these comments and saying he dismisses the entire legal system here because this is a man-made system, he might insist on some other passage of the Quran or some hadith report of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So he starts from a different juncture, and he goes off on a tangent that has been probably elaborated like this by some scholar in the past, and perhaps even by some scholar that he may find access to on the internet even to this day.
Sheema Khan, a follow to you here. Can you give us a sense, based on your conversations with your fellow Muslims around Canada, how much of a concern within the community radical Islam is?
Well, if you mean radical propensity towards violence.
Yes, that's what I mean.
I think everybody's, yeah, I think there's a lookout for that. But I think there's a sort of another concern. And before someone will actually get to the stage of planning or committing violence, there's a pre-stage of going through a very strict, very narrow, very narrow vision of what the faith is, and a very judgmental, very self-righteous. And, those are the signs that I think, communities worry about. And I mentioned this in my column the other day, is that in some places we have noticed that there's a growing trend by a certain, component of the community, which follows a very narrow vision, which is growing in influence. And I think that's more of a major concern now, because that's almost, I mean, you don't know where it's going to lead to. You know, hopefully it won't be violence. But we're just seeing an extremely more sort of conservative approach and a very sort of judgmental approach where if you don't ascribe to the same vision as these other Muslims do, they deem you either lesser or even a disbeliever. So we're starting to see that schism.
Yeah, this is, again, I should follow up with the Imam on this one because Shihab Essegayr allegedly, we don't know this, but allegedly we hear, chastised a Muslim co-worker for paying Canadian taxes, ripped up a charity poster that showed a picture of a woman, and I wonder, are these the kind of early warning signs that somebody is trending towards radical Islam and violence?
These are definitely signs, and we saw this also in the report coming out of Boston that the elder Tsarnaev brother had rebuked a preacher in the mosque after the preacher celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. and what he stood for. What needs to be done is that the Muslim community needs to ensure that our imams and preachers, like that preacher who was celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. and what he stood for, are able not only to celebrate these figures and to celebrate what's good about modern Western Canadian society and others, but also to show that there is an Islamic root for this attitude. In that whatever we're seeing here that is good in Canada and America and in the rest of the modern civilized world is not foreign to the Islamic culture and ethos. It is actually fundamental to the Islamic culture. When we look at Canadian law and we see the justice that normally is characterized, the justice for which Canadian law is normally characterized, we should see this as Islamic. So it is not Islam versus Canada. It is not the Quran versus Canadian law. The two are largely overlapping.
Well, and in fact, in this case, the RCMP say they learned about this in the first place because of a tip they got from one of your colleagues, who nobody has identified and ought not to be identified. But I wonder how what was your reaction when you found out that it was a Muslim imam who put the RCMP onto their story?
Well, I think it is good that Muslim imams are coming forward, and lay people as well should come forward and help our law enforcement authorities to catch culprits before they commit crimes. Of course, in the present situation, we still have to withhold judgment on the final outcome of the court trials, which we will expect. But definitely it is a responsibility of all Muslims and imams to protect this country. It is our country and all of the citizens in this country. They are our neighbors, and just as the Gospels preach the importance of being good to your neighbors, even more so we find a great emphasis in the Islamic tradition on taking care of your neighbors.
Sheema Khan, I gather the Prime Minister and the opposition leader jointly thank the Muslim community, and in particular this imam, for coming forward and helping to ensure that this thing didn't get violent, that this plot did not go forward. Is that praise warranted in your view?
Well, it's not so much praise, but I think you know, we're all in this together. I'm a Canadian. I happen to be Muslim, and this is my country, and we should all be looking out for each other. And so, if someone comes forward to help prevent some harm or evil, I would praise that person too. In this case, it happens to be an alleged terror plot. It could be some other crime by some other individual, and so it's not so much Muslims and non-Muslims, it's Canadians coming together and acting together to prevent harm.
Do you think the imam who did come forward and give this information to the authorities has any reason to worry for his safety?
Well, I think, I don't know why he's kept he would like to keep anonymous, and that's his right. We get anonymous tips all the time, and he might be worried for the safety of his family. I'm not quite sure why. He might not want the notoriety. He might not want the fame. Maybe he's a humble person. I don't know why. But the fact that he did take a stand and that his example is being highlighted, I think, is a very, very positive step.
No, it's a good point. There are many potential interpretations for his anonymity at the moment, but I wonder, Imam, if if fear of reprisal is one of the reasons why the authorities and the community apparently are keeping his anonymity in place right now.
This would be a very good reason.
Full stop, period, full
Yes.
stop, move on. Do you feel at moments like this, you know, there are always, Imam, radical voices that are happy, that media are happy to put on television and they are happy to go on television. Do you feel a responsibility at a moment like this as a moderate Muslim to come on television and say your piece?
Absolutely, and I feel more responsibility than just simply speaking to the public on this. I feel that Muslim imams have to do a lot of groundwork here. Those like this young man who appeared in court and lambasted the Canadian justice system because this is based on, as he says, a man-made law. They are trumping the Quran as their the basis on which they stand. Muslim imams like myself have the responsibility to go into the Quran, to open it up, and to show these young radicals that in fact the Quran is not about their radical way, but in fact the Quran is about peace, it is about moderate living, it is about living in harmony with our neighbors, whether we live in Canada, United States of America, or any part of the world. That the Islam is for peace, not because we would like to say that to the public, but because this is what the Quran itself dictates. And we have specific verses to show for that. And unless we have this substance, our words may just seem to them as a way of pacifying the public while they go about doing whatever they're up to.
Understood. We have a few minutes left here, and I want, Sheema, starting with you first, I want to read you something that one of your fellow Globe and Mail types, a writer named Adnan Khan, wrote in the Globe recently. He said, "The narrative of Islam has traveled down a dark road, and Muslims themselves are largely to blame. That they have allowed a small, inherently marginalized group to hijack that narrative is a reflection of an overarching malaise in Muslim thought." That was published April 24th, just the other day. Do you share this view, Sheema Khan?
I mean, it's a sweeping statement, and has there been a malaise in Muslim thought? I would definitely agree with that for the past 200 years. And what we see now today is, if you like, is a clash of ideas or of ideologies. Its roots are actually in the Middle East, and you know, in the Arabian Peninsula, and you know, given the globalization of ideas today, these conflicts are spreading, if you like. And I don't mean physical conflicts. I mean, you know, ideological conflicts. And I think there's no better place than here, where we have the freedom to debate, to express, to you know, to exchange ideas. This is where, you know, we should address these ideas head on and have these discussions within our community. And as the Imam said, you know, bring forth arguments based, if you like, on religious grounds, and if you like, push back. There has to be a pushback, and it has to be done internally. Otherwise, I agree with you know, the columnist you quoted. You'll get a small group, basically intimidating everyone else, and we cannot let that happen.
Imam, do you see part of your job as Sheema says, pushing back against those who've marginalized the faith in this way?
Absolutely, and the malaise the author spoke about there is that, you know, or one of the aspects of this is that for the longest time, the Islamic consciousness was built within a situation in which Muslim rule was dominant, or at least there was a caliphate established somewhere in the world, the last of which was abolished in 1924 in Turkey. Since then, there has been some agitation among many Muslims wanting this caliphate and this great power of Islam to be manifested somewhere in the world. And we're not seeing it. So this gives rise to a lot of frustration. And when young Muslims take up the religion for the first time, either they become for the first time a serious Muslim, or they now embrace the religion of Islam, when they look at that Islamic history and they look at the present reality and they see that that caliphate is not happening, and it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, to them, the one last thing they can do is die for Islam by killing some non-Muslims at the same time. the more the merrier for them. And they think that they're serving Islam in some way. So my message in the mosques for the last decade and on our television programs on which I appear is to say to our young Muslims that we need them not to die for Islam, but to live for Islam. What we need now is not to establish a caliphate, but to show good examples of Muslims who are successful in the world, and at the same time, they are attached to their faith. They are serving not only God, but serving humanity. And that will bring back a glory of Islam in the sense that people will appreciate, even if they do not accept Islam, they will appreciate it as something that is a good thing, that is seen in the goodness of the works that Muslims themselves are producing here in Canada and elsewhere.
Sheema Khan, let me give you the last 30 seconds to respond by speaking to that expression we've heard before, not in my name. How important is it for moderate Muslims to say, not in my name will you do this?
Very important, and we have to be much louder and much more visible. You know, coming on programs like this is fine, but I think the community has to give thought to having a large public march. I mean, we will go out and march when we see, you know, Palestinians suffering or Syrians or other, you know, our brethren suffering elsewhere. But I think we have to stand up for what we believe in here and to let not just the wider public know, but to let those who harbor, you know, ill thoughts and plans for violence that we don't accept you. And we completely repudiate what you plan. And we are Canadian, we are Muslims, and we stand for what is right and what is just here in this country. And I think we have to make it loud.
We always enjoy having the two of you on the program, two of the most thoughtful Muslim voices, two of the most thoughtful voices, period, in this country on our program. Sheema Khan in Ottawa, Imam Shabir Ally here in Toronto. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.